Welcome to our Value Stream podcast. Today our guest is David Cannon. Let me introduce you David. David has been a service management practitioner and consultant for more than 3 decades. During that time, he has seen the industry go through at least 4 technology-enabled shifts. David focused on understanding the core management disciplines that enable organizations to successfully navigate each shift. He has contributed to different versions of ITIL as a reviewer, as a co-author, as a lead editor. He also has led consulting practices at Hewlett-Packard, BMC Software, and Forrester Research, supporting the definition and implementation of strategy at all levels in more than 250 organizations. David is a co-founder of ITSM International and recipient of the ITSMF Lifetime Achievement Award. So it is my pleasure to have David today. Before starting this podcast, don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel. This podcast is proposed by Osiris Global, an organization that delivers consulting training and auditing services in service and value management. Let's start the podcast. Hello, David. It's a real pleasure to have you today in our podcast. How are you today?
Very well, thanks. And really good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, that's my pleasure. So, David, you are very experienced, as I said in introducing you to our audience in service management. You are what we can say a legend in this field. But for people who don't know you, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, David. I've been in service management since the late 1980s, really. Discovered ITIL in the early 90s and I saw it as being hugely valuable to me as a practitioner at the time. And so became committed to using it and then eventually training and consulting in it. But the one thing that really struck me about service management is that it is constantly changing because the industry that we work in is constantly changing. So we can solve certain problems in one way, 1 year, and in 3 years' time, we need to relook at that because the whole industry has changed. And so service management as a profession has really grown and changed and evolved over the past 30 years. And that's really what I've dedicated myself to doing, is understanding that change and trying to document it and talk about it. So I've been involved in several of the ITIL books, and I still think that we have a lot to learn. I think we have a long way to go still.
That's nice to see that people like you are humble enough to say that they have a lot of things to learn. That's a good thing for people who listen to us. I like that. Okay, this podcast is about service and value management. And when we talk about value management, now, for instance, in ITIL 4, we have this old concept of value stream that has been more explained in detail in the latest version of ITIL. If we talk about value streams, what would be the positioning of value stream in an organization? Is it value stream something that is tactical, that is operational, that is strategic from your point of view? And a question related to that, is incident management a value stream?
Some great questions. Let's try and answer them. So first of all, when we talk about value streams, I do believe that value streams have to happen at every level. So it's strategic, it is tactical, it's operational. From a strategic level, value streams are a way of understanding what our business is about, how we create or build value, how our customers perceive the value from our organization, and how how we deliver that value or deliver things that are valuable. So from a strategic point of view, it's about understanding how our organization needs to be structured, what kind of products and services it needs to provide, and how it provides those products and services. From a tactical level, it's all about putting in place plans that enable us to achieve that value. And from an operational level, it's all about delivering on those commitments that we've made. So your understanding of a value stream needs to be consistent from strategy all the way through to the operation of the organization. And the value streams are the same. They're just articulated differently depending on who you are and where you are in the organization. So that's the first point. Is incident management a value stream? It could be. Not in all cases. Sometimes it's just a way of fixing something that broke. In other cases, it is a core and essential element of your business's ability to meet the needs of your customers. And in that case, it may be a value stream. But there's no definitive one answer to say this is a value stream or it's not a value stream. It all depends on who you are and what you're doing. And that answer is one that I will use in every context for service management, because you cannot define service management without understanding who you are and what you're doing. And that will give you the context that you need. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, I hope.
Yes, of course. Thank you for this answer. When we talk about value streams, as I said, it's not a new concept, but
No.
it can be a relatively new concept for IT service management practitioner. Do you do the same diagnostic, or what is, according to your experience, the level of adoption of IT value streams, if any?
I think we're getting into a state in the industry where we need to pay more attention to them. I don't think we've really spoken too much about value streams in the past. The reason for that is because I think in the past, most IT departments act as an internal service provider. The value definition is defined by the consumer of their service. So if I'm providing a service to the business unit, I, as an IT professional, depend on the business unit to define what is valuable. And as long as they've done that and they tell me what they need, I can provide that. And that was the model up until probably the 2010, maybe. But increasingly, we find that business units themselves are making their own decisions and very often managing their own IT solutions with some involvement from IT. It's not so much that IT is a service provider, it's that they're involved in some of the business activities. And when that happens, it becomes really important to know how each stakeholder contributes to what is being done. In other words, the value that is being produced in the organization. So the more complex an organization gets and the more people that are involved in defining and delivering services and building products, the more essential it is that you have some way of aligning them, of making sure that they're all contributing the right thing at the right time. And value streams have become or are becoming one of the ways that we can align these different groups, and it's being used pretty effectively. Now, that wasn't by any means the original idea of value streams. So value streams is a long history dating back, especially the way that we use it, to manufacturing. We've had to apply value streams because in service management, yes, sometimes we deal with products, but very often we're dealing with services. In other words, people are dynamically consuming products or services that are offered. And value streams were not designed for dynamic consumption. So we've had to think about how we adapt and apply that whole concept of value streams to the concept of services and the management of services, and also how we look at both products and services at the same time as different components of value.
Oh, that's very interesting what you've just said about service. I would say what they say, the product service system. So that means that thinking of that as a whole. because that's what we have in, for instance, Industry 4.0. And this is very important. That's my next question on that, is about value stream, how it is applied today. You know, there is the value stream consortium organization
Yes.
that exists. You know, the book from Mick Kasten, From Project to Product. And in fact, the value stream as it is used today is mainly focused on development, on time to market, on developing a product. But as you said, we talk about product and service. So how we can extend the application of value stream to service management and not restrict it to product management?
The key thing there, in my mind, and I think the Value Stream Consortium as well is very much in line with this. But to my mind, if you want to use value streams in a service industry, you have to go one step at least further along the value stream. So in a product environment, as long as the product has been properly defined and the research that you've done, whether that's market research or interviews with customers or requirements analysis, as long as you've completed that successfully and you've translated that into a product specification, all you have to do is make sure that that product is built with the least amount of waste, and so that you're efficient, that you're doing it in a timely manner, and that you're getting those specifications out. And so the value stream analysis itself only has to go to the point to where the product is constructed, right? Now, in services, the services happen once the product has been constructed and it is being used in real time by consumers. And the use of services in real time is dynamic. It is not fixed. There is no fixed specification of a particular service. One person may use a service to do one thing. Another person may use that same service to do something completely different. And this is the same in any service industry, whether you're talking about a restaurant, a hotel, a hospital, whatever the case may be. People consume services dynamically. So not only do they have different reasons for using those services, but they also use them in different patterns. So depending on what's happening that day, a particular service may have a particular heavy demand because there is some event that's going on in the organization or in the customer's environment. Whereas on another day, it may be underutilized. You want to do value stream management in that context, you have to understand the context of the customer. You have to know what is valuable to them. Because if you don't know that, you have no way of understanding whether the products and services that they're using are actually meeting their needs. Therefore, is value actually being achieved? When you're building products, you've done a lot of research and you define the specifications which tell you that if you meet these requirements, then value will be created. But in service, you have to go that extra step and you have to look at in real time how the service is being consumed. One of the reasons why when we talk about value, the whole concept of experience management becomes really important. It's not just about, hey, we gave you what you asked for. It's about, we gave you what you asked for. How do you feel about that? Did it meet your needs? Were you able to achieve the things that you set out to achieve by using this product or service? And that's what value stream analysis has to take into account when we're working with services. I have to be very careful because some people will say, "Oh, you said you don't worry about the customer experience in products." No, that's not what I mean at all. It's just a matter of timing, right? So, in products, when you're building the product, you're basing that on the research of that experience. But in service, you're basing it on the real time experience of that service or product. So
Yes, yes, thank you very much. That's
sure.
quite clear and very interesting. One thing I wanted to add about that is also when we talk about concrete application of what you said in organizations. Do you agree with that, the fact that in many organizations, in fact, the story ends once the product has been created and the service has been delivered? In other words, there are not so many organizations focusing their energy on what we call service metering, or how we can monitor the service usage. And I think honestly that it is a very big, huge source of value capabilities. That's where we can really optimize the way we work.
Absolutely, and it's what you said there reminded me of something that is definitely true in the US, and I'm not sure if it's true in other parts of the world. I suspect it is, but if you're dealing with banks, for example, banks have this assumption that as long as they are compliant with regulations and are offering a certain catalog of services, therefore they are providing value. And what you find very often is that the experience of customers is really poor because the bank is so focused on, did we meet our criteria here? They don't tend to ask the question, are there other ways of meeting the regulatory requirements while providing even better customer experience? Some of them have started doing this, but I'll give you some very clear examples. And I know this was during COVID, but they haven't changed. During COVID, I needed to open a bank account for a company that I was part of. And the bank that I went to had a requirement that said every single person that is a shareholder in the small business needs to be physically in the branch. And I said, but we're in COVID. Number one, we cannot be in the branch. Number two, we have people in 3 different cities around the US, and they can't travel. Even if we could get into the branch, they can't get here. So what do we do? And they had no answer. Now I thought, okay, I understand this is in the middle of COVID, and I understand they have to comply with these regulations. Where are we now? 4 years later? No, 2 years later. And we're sitting in with the same bank trying to resolve an issue with one of the accounts, and they say every single one of you must be in the branch. Why? Because it's regulatory compliance. And I'm like, no, that is not regulatory compliance at all. Nowhere in the regulation does it say that a customer needs to be physically in a branch to do this type of business. It says you need to know who the customer is and validate their identity. You need to, there are some other things, but it doesn't tell you how. And so we see very often that, yes, I'm complying with the specifications of my product, but am I really contributing to the value of my consumer, of my customer? And I have to say, those banks that are answering this question in the correct way are winning more and more business. Those that are rigidly sticking to, but this is the regulation and I'm not interested in the customer experience, they're losing business. So I don't know if that kind of illustrates the point that you're making. Yeah.
Yes, that's very clear, and that's also when I talk, this podcast, as I said in introduction, is about service and value management. And for me, service management, and to be honest, is positioning in before the demand arrives and after the outcome appears, in a service value system. That's where value management is. Value management is about challenging your customer. The customer doesn't always know what he wants, at the beginning. So challenging his demand, having some innovating, let's say, proposal to the customer, and not just, as you say, passively waiting for the customer to specify what they want. And on the other hand, value management is really about that. We invested a lot of time, money, resources on products, and now we see that the usage of the service on top of this product is very poor. Why? What is your experience? So for me, and I would like you to tell me your view on that. Value management is really about these 2 bits, the input part and the output part of the SVS. If I just try to visualize it using ITIL 4 terminology.
So I think there's a lot in that scenario. I think one of the things that really strikes me about this is, oh, well, actually, there's a couple of things that strike me. The first one is the assumption that we know what customers want or what they need. And this was one of the fundamental flaws in ITIL version 2, moving into ITIL version 3, which is all you have to do is give a business unit what it asks for. In version 3, we started challenging that and saying, yes, but we have a very rigorous way of defining requirements and strategies for IT. But do all business units have that same level of rigor when it comes to identifying, what it is that they need? And what we learned is that very often a business unit was asking for something that they had not properly researched, or that they didn't really need, or that they would spend too much on for the return on that investment because they hadn't done due diligence. And in version 3, we started challenging this and saying, we need to make sure that as we're working with other business units in our organization, that we are assisting them to understand all of the implications of the decision that's being made. And so that becomes part of value, is understanding how value is created. What is the value that this business unit is looking for? And it led us to this conclusion that the business units were not in fact customers, but they were in fact colleagues. Right? We are both, as an IT department and a business unit, working towards the same set of business objectives. Whereas before it was understood that the business had the money, they gave the money to IT, and IT created the service. Therefore, the business unit was a customer because they paid for the service. Well, yes, they did in terms of, an operational budget, but in terms of the ability to meet an organizational objective, we're working together on this. And we both have to be on the same page if we're going to achieve that objective. We can't have one group demanding things from another group and forcing them to do things just because they have the budget to do it. Even when the second group, IT in this case, knows that it's wrong to do this, or that it's going to waste money, or whatever the case is. So that was one of the fundamental aspects of version 3, is understand the assumption that you're making when you say, I'm giving the customer what they need. Right? Does the customer fully understand what their requirement is? And I think to a certain extent, this also holds true for external customers, like you're saying. Challenge those customers to say, what is it that you really need? Now we say, oh, now what is that? That's not our right. How can we dare do that as a provider? But actually, if you think about it, what you're saying is, I want to learn more about what is important to you. I want to learn more about why you're asking me for this. I want to learn more about whether this is the best way to give you what you need. Or there may be a different way or a better way, or, so I think this whole thing of value, and again, we come to ITIL 4, where we talk about value co-creation. And part of value co-creation is having a consistent understanding of what is needed, of what is valuable. And that applies to both internal relationships as well as external relationships. So I think what you said, that kind of rung that bell. Test the assumption that you've made, that what the customer is asking for is really what is valuable to them. Then I think the second thing that really struck me in the scenario is this idea that what may be right for a customer today may not be good enough in 6 months' time because of the change that's happened. I'm not going to mention any product names, but we've all seen how certain products that we use every day have changed. Like, for example, we're having this podcast on Teams.
Yeah.
Have a look at how Teams has changed over the past year versus how some of its competitors have changed over the past year. And ask yourself which one is really understanding is really changing according to the changing needs of its customers, right? And we look at some of those that came out early in the pandemic and were really heavily used early in the pandemic, not being used that much anymore. And we see others which have kind of evolved and changed because The business that we're in today isn't the business that we were in 2020. It has changed. We do business differently. Now, if your product was designed for the way that we worked in 2020, it's not going to be relevant for the way that we work today, just 4 years later, not even 4 years later. So it's one of the things I learned as we were doing the research into the strategy book was that changes to the strategy can be initiated from anywhere, which is different to pre-2010. And I'll tell you why I put the mark at 2010. Pre-2010, your strategy could only be created and therefore could only be changed by a small group of executives in the organization. We found that in many organizations, nobody but those executives ever saw the strategy. It was confidential. So, that was the way we did strategy, and the strategy lasted for between 1 and 5 years. What we've learned with digital technology, and why I say 2010 is because that's when cloud started becoming mainstream. And with cloud, what you're doing is you're moving things that are, in the financial terms, capital expenditure to operational expenditure. But in strategy terms, you're moving them from investments in long-term assets and capabilities into operational capabilities. And you're moving the decision-making from a group of executives to a group of consumers and managers. And as a result of that, changes to the strategy can come from anywhere in the organization. So at a strategic level, change in strategy comes because I'm monitoring the environment, both internal and external. I'm seeing, oh, we made this investment in this tool, but users are, their behavior patterns, their usage patterns are changing. And it's changing because of some other disruptive technology that's come along. How are we going to respond to that? And these changes they can happen at any time. We don't wait for a year before we analyze whether changes are happening to our consumer behavior. They're happening in real time. So we're constantly monitoring the strategic environment, so the external, internal environment. Then we have strategic initiatives. And as we're going through strategic initiatives, we have a very clear idea of what we're trying to achieve in the initiative. But we suddenly learn as we're implementing this initiative that there may be a different or better way of doing this thing. And so we may find that from the initiative itself, we recognize that this initiative is not going to be successful if we do it the way that it was defined. So we may initiate a strategic change from that initiative. And then on the operational level, we find that one day somebody finds a new tool and they bring it into work. I remember this with iPads. And so somebody brought their iPad to work. And before you know it, they had changed the way they were working. And suddenly the IT department had to look at this and say, hold on, there is nowhere in our strategy which talks about iPads and handheld devices and mobile technology and TikTok and whatever else. We're going to have to think about this. So we now see a strategic challenge being given to us by an operational use of technology. So these days, the change to your strategy as an organization, and therefore also the changes in your value streams, can come from anywhere, externally, internally. And the focus needs to shift in organizations from strategic planning to strategic monitoring, and the comparison of real life behavior and experience with your intention. Anyway, so sorry, a long answer to the scenario that you posed.
Oh, that's really a very, very, very insightful answer. What shall I say? Nothing more. I mean, it's very very good, and I'm happy that you align with my view on value management, because it's always easy to have things under control in terms of developing a product. It's the easy part of the work of our job, but the difficult part of the work is exactly what you said about identifying these changes that can come from everywhere. Not only identifying them, but knowing how to address them. That's
Right.
when you said about the iPad, I would say, okay, iPad triggers bring your own device.
Right.
Bring your own device is a nightmare for many organizations. It's a nice idea, but in terms of realization, I don't know your experience on that, but my experience in different organizations is that bring your own device is not so easy
No.
to really
And
implement.
so and it has all kinds of challenges with it. I mean, for example, I was working in an organization when this happened, and of course, this was a few years ago. There are more modern examples, but this one sticks in my mind. Is this particular organization was looking for ways to support these new iPads that were in the organization and the new capabilities, the new ways of working that these iPads offered, the new services that needed to be created. At the same time, they were trying to outsource their service desk. And I look at this and say, well, how on earth can you outsource a service desk when one of the most critical services that is being developed right now, you do not even understand? How do you expect to be able to support it with an outsourced service desk who does not understand your business, who does not understand the particular use cases of these devices? This is ridiculous. And I think we're also sitting in this situation today. We have a very real challenge with organizations outsourcing all kinds of things to managed service providers, and managed service providers making promises of how well they understand businesses and so on. And there is this misalignment, and it comes back to value. It is really important. Here's the challenge to people who are outsourcing, as well as the outsourcing organizations, the managed service providers, to really understand what the value is before you start putting in place those contracts and so on. And if there is something that is a core capability to your organization that you are that depends absolutely on your own knowledge of your own organization, it should not go to anybody else. It should stay within your organization. Value really helps us to understand which things can be outsourced, those things that are commoditized, which anybody can do, versus those things that are truly valuable to us, that they're an essential part of our organization's value to our customers. And if we have those things, we need to spend a lot of time learning how to manage them and learning how to evolve and develop them. You can't just take those things and outsource them. So yeah, this whole value discussion is just hugely important for the industry right now. I'm just seeing so many decisions being made without considering, whether something is part of our value proposition or not.
Yes, that's clear. Before I have my last question, which is absolutely not related to the topic, but that's a kind of tradition I have in my podcast. You may have something else you wanted to add, because it would be a pleasure. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. So unfortunately for me, the time is limited. So maybe you want to add something for our audience.
Oh, the only thing I would add, it's I don't know, it's nothing very insightful. The thing that I would add is, for every new thing that's coming into this industry right now, don't forget the basics. It is so tempting to look at some new capability, a ChatGPT or a Microsoft Autopilot or a Google Bard or whatever it is that you happen to be looking at now, and saying, this is the answer. This is going to give us everything that we couldn't do before. I'm like, no, the reason you couldn't do the things before is because you keep hoping that the technology is going to give you core capabilities that you need to develop. You can't outsource your capabilities to tools, not yet anyway. Artificial intelligence is not that mature. So my advice is, for every new thing that comes along, review the basics. What is it going to take to support that? What is it going to take to articulate the value of that change. What is it going to take to make sure that your organization's operating model is adjusted to deal with this change? These are all basic elements. They have not changed in 100 years. There's no reason for them to change now. So I would say that that's my advice. Continue to focus, not to focus, but to remind yourself that the basics are still important, and do not get sucked into this hype from vendors that you don't have to worry about basics because the tool takes care of it for you. If they say that, test it. I know that's got very little to do with value streams, but I think, you know, part of value is being good at what you do. And you can't be good at what you do if you're constantly questioning what you do and undermining your experience. You know, it's important. There's a reason why these things exist. There's a reason why you became good at what you do. Yes, you have to keep challenging that. Are those reasons still valid? Are they still relevant? But we can't just discard them without really doing some due diligence.
Oh, yes, I fully agree with you. And that's also the reason why, for instance, Untitled is so successful. It's also, you know, constantly reminding that common sense is here. And it would say, you know, this is the basic for many things. And when I'm delivering some training courses in Untitled, because I'm doing sometimes, I always repeat that, you know, Untitled is a structured common sense. We can agree on that or not, but it's a structured common sense.
Yeah, it's very often a starting point. It's a way to catalog things that are needed. You may not want to do them in exactly that way. You may want to miss some of those things out, but at least you've got a starting point where you can make a conscious decision about how you do that. And by the way, as we're talking about this, Untilted's not the only one out there. I think, you know, DevOps, the agile approaches like Scrum and Safe and so on, they all have a COBIT, of course. And all of these, they all have something of value to add. They all have some really important ideas that you can catalog and say, okay, I'm trying to do this. This approach says I need this. This approach says I need this in this situation. Which ones do I really need, and how am I going to do that in my organization? Absolutely right. I think it's very helpful to refer to these. It's not helpful to follow them 100%. You know, it's not helpful to say, well, you know, Eitel says, therefore we must. That's not helpful. What is helpful to say is, here are a list of things that Eitel says. Which one of those things applies to me and why? Which one of them don't apply to me and why not? And if we're going through that exercise, then we can be sure that we've pretty much identified all of the basics we need to be successful.
Thank you very much, David. So now we are in the final part of my podcast, where I decided to have a kind of tradition because you are the third episode, so
Okay.
So it's a long tradition now. And as I live in Prague in the Czech Republic, I will give you one or two Czech words that you may or not remember, because Czech language is not, you know, so often used in world, and I have the disadvantage to speak English as I speak, but I speak also French and I speak fluently Czech. And you know in Lean that there are different types of waste, you know, the Moody, the Mura, and so on. Yeah. And for instance, Mura, which is strange, it's not only this Japanese word, but Mura in Czech means butterfly.
Ah.
Yeah, but be careful. Noční Mura means nightmare. So it's a butterfly in the night. So Noční Mura is a nightmare, but Mura is a butterfly. Nightmare, you know, source of waste. It can be the consequences of that. That was my last word. I think I will make a lot of difficulties for the captions on the subtitles of this video for that.
Right.
Because they
Okay.
expect an English word, and Nochni Mura means this nightmare. So anyway, it was really my pleasure, and I really would like to thank you for accepting my invitation on this podcast.
Of course.
And I hope it will not be the last episode that we will be able to record together.
Well, and thank you for having me. I think value is at the core of so much that's happening in the industry today. And it's a good reminder to us to really focus on what is important to us as an organization, as individuals, and as professionals in this space. I think it is something that we have neglected too much in the past. So really appreciate you bringing this focus.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you.
Thank you, David.